IELTS Reading Lesson 2, Basic Exam Techniques and Gap Fill Questions. Let's start with basic exam techniques. 1. Don't read the passage first. Instead, just read the title and go straight to the first question. You'll waste time if you read the whole passage first, and time is a big problem in the IELTS reading test. Technique number 4. Underline keywords in the question. Any word that you think is important in the question that you want to search for, underline it. Then, search for those words in the passage and underline them as well in the passage. It's important to always underline things that you find, because if you're turning the paper over and you forget what you found or you lose what you found, you're going to waste time. So underlining things means that you won't forget or lose them. Also, it helps you to focus on the important words that get you the answers, what I call the keywords. Number 7, read that part of the passage carefully. Where you've found the keywords in the passage, then read that part of the passage carefully. And try to get the answer, of course. Write the answer on the answer sheet. 3 more pieces of advice before we move on. First, read at normal speed. Notice I didn't tell you to read quickly or to skim or to scan. No, just read at normal speed from the beginning of the passage until you find the answer. When you found that answer, you continue reading at normal speed below it for the next question. Only skim or scan for names or numbers. In my experience, many teachers and books tell students to skim or scan, which basically means reading quickly. And I've found that students, when they read too quickly, they miss most of the answers. So only skim or scan if you're looking for very, very easy words, and I would say they are just names or numbers. If you're looking for the year 1999, for example, you should be able to easily scan the passage to find that. But if you're looking for a normal word, like the word buy, to buy something in a shop, you might be scanning or skimming the passage for that word and it isn't there because they've used the word purchase, for example, instead. So don't skim or scan for most words, just read at normal speed. And last piece of advice, miss any difficult questions. If you're finding a question difficult, you're wasting time on it, that's valuable time that you need for the other questions. So as soon as you feel that one question is difficult and you can't find the answer, miss it. Keep going and get to the end of the test. Get to the end of the test and then return to the questions that you missed. And they will be the most difficult questions, and so if you don't get them all, it's not too much of a problem. At least you haven't missed any easy questions. So those are my main basic exam techniques. We'll look at those in this lesson with gap fill questions, and you'll see the same techniques used in future lessons when I talk about true, false, not given, multiple choice, etc. There'll be a few more techniques maybe for those types of questions, but today we're just going to work on these basic techniques. In each lesson on this course, I'll cover a different question type. Here are the question types that we'll look at. Gap fill, true, false, not given, yes, no, not given, multiple choice, matching paragraph headings, matching paragraph information, matching sentence endings, matching other features, for example names, and short answer questions. And as I said earlier, today's lesson will all be about gap fill questions. Let's look at an example. Imagine you see a passage, here's just a short example passage, and a question. And you can see this is a gap fill question. It says fill the gap with one word. According to my basic techniques that I gave you, we don't read the passage first. All we do is look at the title and then go straight to the first question. And then we read the first question and underline some keywords in it. So let's do that. Fill the gap with one word. Mosses are normally found in something with sufficient moisture and shelter from sunlight. So I've underlined the words that I think I need to search for. Now I can go to the passage and start reading at normal speed from the beginning and search for those words. So we read mosses, and we underline that because it's a keyword from the question, are small flowerless plants that usually grow in. We've got normally found in, that's the same. Look at usually and normally, very similar words. Usually grow in dense green clumps, in damp. Damp is like moisture, wet places. And shady locations. Shady means it's sheltered from sunlight. So look at all those words that we've underlined that are the same as the keywords in the question. We've got mosses, usually grow in. We've got damp for moisture and shady for shelter from sunlight. Now all we need is to fill this gap with one word. Let's read the sentence carefully now. Mosses are small flowerless plants that usually grow in dense green clumps in damp and shady locations. Okay, looking back at the question, we've got the word in just before the gap. Mosses are normally found in something with sufficient moisture and shelter from sunlight. And looking back at the passage, we do have the word in clumps, but we also have in locations. Now, which of those is related to the moisture and shelter from sunlight, or the damp and shady? Well, I would go for the word locations. In damp and shady locations means the same as with sufficient moisture and shelter from sunlight. So we're going to put the word locations in the gap, and that's the correct answer. And we found that answer just by following the list of steps, the basic techniques that I showed you before. And I would say that the most important two techniques that really get you the answer are these two. Number 4, underline keywords in the question, then search for those words in the passage. That's what I call the keyword technique, and it's what I'll be using in all of these reading lessons throughout this course. It's the main way that you find answers. We'll practice some more gap fill questions in a moment, but first we need to know what types of gap fill question there are. So types of gap fill question, I'm going to say that there are 4. First, fill the gaps with words from the passage to complete the sentence. That's what we've just done. We've done an example of that already. Second, fill the gaps to label a diagram. Number 3, fill the gaps with words from a list or from a box. And 4, fill the gaps in a table. So as I said, we've done this type, and we need to look at these 3 types now. At this point, if you haven't done so already, you should stop watching this lesson and print the attached worksheet and try the gap fill exercises on that worksheet. There are 13 questions there, and you're going to see me give the answers to those 13 questions here on the video. So it would be a good idea for you to try using the keyword technique, using the basic techniques that I've suggested. Try all of those 13 questions on the worksheet yourself, and then compare with me here on the video in the rest of this lesson. So I'm going to move on to that now. Remember, we don't read the whole passage first. We go straight to the title to see what the topic is. The title is A Useful Plant. And then we go straight to the first question. We've got this diagram with 4 questions, 4 labels on it, and we have to fill in those gaps. And notice the instruction at the top on your worksheet says no more than 2 words for each gap. Where do we start then? Well, we start with number 1. Don't worry that number 1 is lower down on the diagram. It's the first question, so that's where we begin. And it should be in order in the passage 1, 2, 3 and 4. Hopefully we'll find those answers in the correct order. Let's look for thick leaves for this gap for number 1. If we go to the passage, remember, read at normal speed until you find thick leaves. from the beginning. Mosses are small flowerless plants that usually grow in dense green clumps in damp and shady locations. The individual plants are usually composed of simple one-cell thick leaves covering a thin stem that supports them. I've found thick leaves. You can check back to the question now, and we know that we need to find a word or words before thick leaves. Going back then, let's read this sentence that I've highlighted in blue. The individual plants are usually composed of simple one-cell thick leaves covering a thin stem that supports them. Well, I would go for this answer, one cell, because that's how thick the leaves are. That describes the word thick, one cell thick. That's the best answer, and that's what we're going to put for this gap. Number one, one cell. We've done that question together, but hopefully you've done the other three questions in the same way, searching for keywords. I'm not going to go step by step through all of them because I hope you've got the right idea. Let's just get the right answers. So number two, you should have searched for the word stalk and found that the answer is thin. Then number three, you should have searched for something inside the capsule and found the answer spores. And then you should have done number four, searching for a height of the moss plant, and it's normally between 1 and 10 centimeters. So those are the answers to the diagram question. Now we can move on to the next question section, which is this one. We've got 5 gaps, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and we have to use words from this box at the bottom to fill those gaps. Not words from the passage, words from the box only. As usual, we're going to search for keywords. So let's take number 5 as an example. Mosses grow in something shaded locations. The main keywords that I've underlined are shaded locations because we know the whole passage is about mosses. We can search for something about mosses growing, but the main information to look for is related to shaded locations, and we need another word describing the locations because there's a comma before shaded. So something shaded locations, describing the locations. Let's go to the passage, and again we have to go back to the beginning because this is a new section. You don't always go back to the beginning for a new section, but sometimes you'll have to. And we read, mosses are small flowerless plants that usually grow in dense green clumps in damp and shady locations. So we found the shaded locations part, and remember we needed another word to describe the locations. So here we have it, damp and shady locations. So it looks like damp would be our answer. If we go back to the question and look at the box, do we have the word damp in that box? No, we don't. So we need to find a word in that box that means the same as damp, and that word is moist. It's a synonym. Wet, damp, moist. So moist is going to be the answer. Mosses grow in moist, shaded locations. Notice then that this kind of question can be tricky because you have to look for keywords twice. First in the passage, then you come back and check the box. So we found damp, but then we checked the box and damp wasn't there, so we find the closest word to that, which is moist. Let's try to do question 6 in the same way. If we read from the beginning of the sentence that contains question 6, starting with the word when, and try to find keywords to search for. When mosses grow on trees, they are not classed as something. So if we can find information about mosses growing on trees and what they are not classed as, we should get the answer. If we go back to the text and we continue reading at normal speed from where we finished the previous question, which was question 5, we found that damp and shady locations. So you continue reading all of this highlighted in blue. I'm not going to read it now, but you'd read all of that and you can't find anything in there about moss growing on trees. So you continue to paragraph 2 and let's read this. Species of moss can be classed as growing on rocks, exposed mineral soil, disturbed soils, acid soil, calcareous soil, cliff seeps and waterfall spray areas, stream sides, shaded humusy soil, downed logs, burnt stumps, tree trunk bases, upper tree trunks and tree branches, or in bogs. So we've found something about moss growing on trees. Let's just check the question again. When mosses grow on trees, they're not classed as, so we need to find this part about not classed as. Going back to the text, we haven't seen that yet, so let's carry on reading the last sentence of the paragraph. While mosses often grow on trees as epiphytes, they are never parasitic on a tree. Never parasitic on a tree could be similar to not classed as. So let's have a look at that question. Not classed as, and we've seen never parasitic. Is there anything in the box related to that? Well, we've got the word parasites. So I think that fits. We could say when mosses grow on trees, they are not classed as parasites, and that's the correct answer. So again, we looked for those keywords, grow on trees. We also looked for not classed as, and we found never parasitic. And then we looked in the box for the closest word to that, and we had the word parasites. So they're not parasites when they're growing on trees. So we've got the answers to numbers 5 and 6, moist and parasites. I'm not going to go step by step through numbers 7, 8 and 9. I hope you've tried those questions alone with the worksheet. I'll just give you the answers. Number 7, weeds, 8, qualities, and 9, carpet. Check those answers carefully if you didn't do the worksheet exercise, and look for keywords that get you those answers. Now let's move on to the last question section, which is this gap fill table. For question 10, we're looking for a type of moss that is wild and must be something, one word. Let's also look for florist, trade and home decoration. Those will be easy keywords to notice in the passage. So something about this wild moss for florist, trade and home decoration, what must it be? If we go back to where we were in the passage, number 9, question number 9 that I gave you was about the carpet in Temple Gardens. So because we haven't remembered reading anything about the florist trade or wild moss or the home decoration, we can keep reading from below number 9, question number 9. So after carpet, a forest scene, as it is thought to add a sense of calm, age and stillness. Moss is also used in bonsai to cover the soil and enhance the impression of age. There's nothing about wild moss for florists and home decoration there, so we need to go to the next paragraph. There is a substantial market in mosses gathered from the wild. There's the word wild. The uses for intact moss are principally in the florist trade and for home decoration. Here must be the answer. We've found wild, florist trade and home decoration. At this point, let's quickly check back to the question. And we're looking for, we've found those keywords, but we're looking for what this wild moss must be. What must it be? And we're only allowed one word. So let's read the sentence carefully. There's a substantial market in mosses gathered from the wild. The uses for intact moss are principally in the florist trade and for home decoration. The only word describing what this moss should be like is the word intact, meaning it's in one piece. It isn't destroyed in any way. It hasn't fallen apart. It's all in one piece. So that fits. Let's put that as our answer. Type of moss, wild, and it must be intact in one piece. It can be used then for the florist trade and home decoration. That makes sense. You would do the other answers in the same way. Questions 11, 12 and 13. Looking for keywords and filling those gaps with one word from the passage. I'll just give you the answers now because I hope you've tried this alone. Number 11, soil. 12, whiskey. and 13 wounds. And that takes you to the end of the exercise. What have we seen there then? Well, we've seen types of gap fill question. 1, fill the gaps with words from the passage. 2, fill the gaps to label a diagram. 3, fill the gaps with words from a list or box. And 4, fill the gaps in a table. And we've also seen that for gap fill questions, you can normally find the answers in order in the passage. Each separate gap fill section that we did today, the answers were in order. And we used these techniques, all of those 11 techniques there, but the 2 key ones, numbers 4 and 5, are what I call the keyword technique, underlining words in the questions and finding similar words in the passage that give you the answer. And finally, I tell my students that when they've finished a reading exercise at home, not in the exam of course, but when you're practicing at home, make a keyword table. So in this column you have keywords in the questions, and then in the next column you have similar words in the passage. So for example, from today's exercises we've had inside, containing, that was the spores inside the capsule of the moss. Shaded, shady, moist, damp, not classed as parasites, never parasitic, seen as, considered, special qualities, sense of calm, age and stillness, to dress wounds, as dressings on soldiers' wounds. Those are the key words, or some of them, that I would put in my table from today's lesson. And even if they're easy keywords, it's always a good idea to make note of them like this, because the more you get used to finding keywords, the better you'll get at IELTS reading. That's the end of today's lesson. In the next lesson, we'll look at true, false, not given, and yes, no, not given questions.